Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Volunteer West Virginia Wednesday. We're so happy to see you all. The sun just started shining in Charleston, so we should have a nice training ahead of us. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes, but in the meantime, we have a chat box question for you all on the screen. So if you take a second to look on the screen in the purple box, you're going to tell us what organization are you with and what is your must-have grant writing fuel, whether it's coffee, a playlist, complete silence, or maybe pretzels or some kind of snack. Just a fun get to know you. So go ahead, introduce yourself. What organization are you with, and what is your grant writing must have? And if you're just joining us, we're introducing ourselves in the chat box. We're sharing what our organization is and what our grant writing must have is. So let's do a shout out to Tracy. Tracy, I see you all the time on these calls. Thanks for always tuning in. And Tracy's must have is coffee. And Tracy is with Youth Services System. So that's a great organization. Thanks for introducing yourself. We have Amy. She's from Bethany College. Her must have is a coffee. So I think you and Tracy could get together, Amy, because I think Youth Service Systems is in Wheeling, and you all could drink coffee and write grants together. Let's do a few more, and then we'll get started. Oh, Frank Rogers, a man of my heart. He's from the Cacapon Institute, and Frank requires quiet to write his grants. I can't say I disagree with that one.
Slushy.
And then let's see. Oh, hey, Johnny. We have Johnny King from the West Virginia Division of Forestry, and his must-have is 90s music. I love 90s music. I've been listening to it a lot recently. It makes me feel young again. I'm not old, but that was my heyday, I should say. And let's do one more. Oh, my goodness. Catherine Tiffner. Excuse me if I pronounced your name wrong, but I love your answer. She is from the Literacy Volunteers of the Eastern Panhandle, and her go-to is information and grant guidelines. So I know, Nikki, you'll love that one. So these are fun. Keep them coming. Well, I do the introduction so you all can learn who's in the room. This will be one of our biggest trainings, so there'll be a lot of interesting people that join us today. So if you haven't met me, my name's Dana Bryant. I'm with Volunteer West Virginia. I'll be the host for today's webinar, and I'm joined by Gina. She's going to be helping out with the chat box and the waiting room. So just know if you get kicked out during the meeting, we'll let you back in, or if you need to step out for a second, we'll keep an eye on the participants so you can join after we get started today. So we probably have some new people on our training today since grant writing is one of our most popular topics. So just a little overview about our webinar series. Today's training is part of the Volunteer West Virginia Wednesday webinar series. This is a webinar series we started during COVID, and it was such a success, we've kept it on ever since. And each Wednesday of the month, one per month, we provide a free training for the community, and we explain our programs, network, provide trainings, and most of all, we have fun. So for the next 2 hours, you can kick back, relax, and enjoy yourself and learn about grant writing. We have some really great topics coming up for the rest of the year. Nicki, who's presenting today, will be joining us again in June, and she'll be talking about the top 8 mistakes made after receiving the grant. So after you all write your successful applications today, you're going to want to come back and learn how to manage that grant funding so you can keep it in the future. In July, we have a new training coming up. I'm excited for this one. It's called Essential Board Member Training, Roles and Legal Duties, and we'll have a guest presenter from Nonprofit Leads from Marietta College, Shannon, at that one. And that should be really interesting if you have board members at your organization, or if you are part of a board, you might benefit from that. August 12th, we're going to have Shannon Stover, and she's going to be talking about community inquiry and assessment techniques. So I imagine this would be really good for you all if you're planning on writing grants. You can learn how to do community assessments and inquiries, and then you could include that in your grant application. And then in September, we're going to have Gina back, and she's going to be talking about National Preparedness Month. So you're not going to want to miss that. And then in October, we're going to be talking about volunteer recruitment strategies that work. Everyone always loves that topic, so you're not going to want to miss that. And then our full schedule for the entire year is available on our website, volunteer.wv.gov. So you can go ahead and sign up for all of these trainings so they're on your calendar and you'll get the Zoom links. So today's training is grant writing training. This is a mini version of our most popular training. In the past, we've done this in person, but now we've moved to virtual over the past few years. And today's training is going to be 2 hours. So you're going to learn all kinds of information that you need to know about writing grants. And one of the most popular questions we receive is about the recording. So today's presentation is being recorded, and I will email it to you all after we wrap up today. I'll send you a copy of the presentation and the slides. So you can take notes or know that these will be coming down your email chain later today. So that's an important part. And then the most important part is our special guest, Nicki Bentley-Colthart from the Grant Advantage. And I'm going to read a little bit of an introduction about Nicki because she's a grant superstar. I love working with Nicki. She's based out of Buchanan. Her and her husband currently opened a new bookstore. And then she also runs the Grant Advantage. So Nicki is the owner of the Grant Advantage. She's an experienced grant writer with nearly 30 years of experiencing researching, drafting, and submitting winning proposals to local, state, and federal sources. Nicki has guided nonprofits, higher education institutes, and state and local governments securing, I have to pause, over $50 million in grant funding since 2020. $50 million, so that's outstanding. Nicki holds a bachelor's and master's degree in social work from West Virginia University. She has honed her grant writing skills over the years as a social worker employed in various West Virginia social human services agencies and as a grant administrator for 2 institutes of higher education, West Virginia State University and West Virginia Wesleyan College. So you all should feel like you're among good company with Nicki. She has developed and delivered training workshops on grant writing basics, partnership development, budget planning, program evaluation, as well as served as an adjunct instructor at West Virginia Wesleyan College. Nicki has practical experience as a grant writer and a program director managing grant awarded projects, which allows her to prepare proposals and training with a sensitivity to the needs of organizations, staff to manage, implement, assess, and report on grant activities after the award is made. So that's a little bit about Nicki. We have an expert in the house, and I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself and say hi, Nicki.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. This is one of my favorite sessions to do each year. We just are going to talk about the basics of grant writing. One of my titles is grant strategist. And so we're going to talk about the strategies today, help you get ready to tackle and just kick the butt of that next grant you're going to write. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm very excited to be here. We are going to talk about where to find grant funding. We're going to talk about what every grant asks for, what categories they ask for. They just all ask for them in different areas and different orders, but they all ask the same questions. And we're going to talk about some of the best tips and tricks I can give you, whether you're a first-time grant writer or you've been writing grants for many years and this is a refresher. So please stay tuned. I am very informal. So if you have a question, just drop it in the chat and I will answer it. And if I don't see it, Dana will tell me, hey, there's a question over there, and we'll get started. So let's go. Next slide, please. Okay, I already did that. We're good. We're going to talk about those things. Let's move on. All right, so the first thing to know about grant writing is the 80-20 rule. Just like in any other business type project or any other large planning area, 80% of your time is spent on planning and 20% is on actually doing the writing. So we're going to spend time today on how do you plan, where do you get the information you need, and those kind of things. Next. So there's lots of different funding opportunities available to nonprofits. There's grants, which are funding that comes from our tax dollars and from corporations and foundations, and we'll talk about that. But when you get a grant, this is where the funding source grants you money to carry out a task. They usually define the overall goal of where they want to go, but you as the writer define the scope of work, the budget, how many people you're going to have involved. You get to develop the scope of how you want it, the plan of action when you write a grant, and the funder says, yep, we agree to that. We will award that grant. Now, another type of funding source, another type of funding tool is a cooperative agreement, and it's very similar to a grant. However, in that case, the scope of work or the plan of action is kind of already decided with the funder, and they work with you to develop the plan. So this might be something where you're doing a seatbelt safety campaign. And the company that's giving out the money says, hey, we have these posters, we have this curriculum, we're just looking for people to spread that out all over the place. If you agree to do this, then we'll agree to pay you to go through that. So that, you kind of work together on how you would get that information out and what it would cost. And you come to an agreement on that. And the next is a contract. And that's a little different. That's where the funder says, okay, I know exactly what I want. I know exactly how it needs to be. I'm going to develop the entire plan of action. You just tell me how much it's going to cost to get it done, and I will agree to that or not. So that's like if you're going to have a house built, right? You're going to get a quote, or you're going to buy a piece of equipment. Those are quotes and contracts for those services. And then I believe I have one more listed there, maybe. Yep, gifts and donations. And those are gifts that come from individuals without any real description of how it has to be. They can be restricted or unrestricted, but there's less of a scope of work defined and more of it's based more on your reputation and on your ability to carry out things as a whole. So while all of those opportunities are available for nonprofits, we're going to spend today just talking about the grants. So yeah, there's going to be instances where you say, well, I had a grant and it was this, this, and this. Well, it may have been a cooperative agreement, or it may have actually been a contract. So you need to go back and look at that and see if there were certain stipulations in there that I don't talk about today, but we're going to focus on the grant aspect today. Okay, next. Restricted gifts are ones that, and restricted grants are ones that have a very specific information on how you use it. I like to equate that to you go visit your grandmother and she notices your shoes are really worn out. And it's worrying grandma, and she just doesn't like that you're running around there with a hole in your shoe. So she gives you some money and she says, next time I see you, I want to see you in a new pair of shoes. So you take that money and you say, yep, grandma, I'll go buy some shoes. And you better do it because she's going to be on you the next time you go back to visit. And the shoes, she's going to be upset if you don't have your shoes. So that's a restricted gift. Now, an unrestricted gift is you say to grandma, hey, I am coming to visit and I'll see you next week. And when you get there, she has money set aside for her and she says, buy yourself something nice. It's not limited to what you need to buy. It's just something that you can spend the money on something nice. That's the realm. So in the grant world, a restricted grant might be, okay, I want you to spend this on faculty development, or I want you to spend this on travel reimbursements for participants, right? They tell you exactly how they want you to spend that donation or that gift or the grant. And an unrestricted is you can use it within the guise of your mission, and you're allowed to do that. So when you see those two words, that's what they mean. All right, and cash can be either restricted or unrestricted. Okay, next. If you have money invested into an endowment, and so you can use grant money, cooperative agreement money, contracts, gifts, depending on how they're structured. If they allow it, endowment and investments are something else you can do, and that helps to spin off interest to help maintain general operation of your organization. Or a lot of colleges have endowments for scholarships. Hospitals have equipment endowments. There's lots of different things out there. But we're not going to go into too much of that. And in-kind donations are things that have a value, but not necessarily money changing hands. That could be volunteer hours, that could be the use of a building, it could be services from an attorney that's provided in kind. Those things are all other ways of funding that come into a nonprofit. But again, we'll focus on the grants today. Okay. All right. So where do public grants come from? Our public sources of funding come from tax dollars. That can be from your local government, your state government, or your federal government. So when you hear in the news or out on the socials somewhere that the federal budget is up for vote again, or there's a budget debate over where this money's going to go and who's going to bid. That's what they're talking about. How are they going to spend our tax dollars? Generally, tax dollars go into the general coffers of the state or the federal government, and then it is divided up by all the different agencies and organizations that are out there. And they all have missions to carry out and goals and objectives that they have to reach. And each one of those agencies then has the opportunity to say, well, we can't do this all ourselves, so we're going to send money out in the form of a grant to have nonprofits and public entities help us to carry out these goals and missions. So that's how the grant budgets get set up. So it's important to know kind of what's going on in the government. Now, it doesn't mean that it's always going to go as we originally planned, but as most of you probably have experienced over the last few years, sometimes things change and we don't have any control over that. But if you know what they're talking about, you know what everybody's arguing about, that's where you're probably going to see money going in the next few years, right? So when we were going through COVID stuff, there was a lot of money that was in there for COVID and post-COVID activities, right? And when we're talking about wartime, there's often a lot of benefits that come out and programs for veterans. So, it's important to be aware of what's going on, and not to worry about it, you don't have any control over it, but to kind of plan in your organization of how are you set up and where are the opportunities. Workforce development, business development, rural issues are all things that are coming out now from the federal government because of a lot of the discussions and debates and things that are going on. So those are things that are coming out. But they are all public tax dollars that get divided up and sent out as grants. Okay, the next slide is about private sources of grant funding. Now, a lot of times we think grants only come from the federal government. That's not true. We can get grants from individual and companies, foundations, family foundations, corporate foundations. There's grant making public charities there, and that would be like Rotary and there's all kinds of things out there that are public membership organizations would be Rotary, sorry, membership organizations. Public charities are things like the Kellogg Foundation and the I can't think of the name right now. I'll come back to it. Corporate philanthropy are things like Walmart and Sheets and banks and all those places that you drive by every day. A lot of those organizations, if they are affiliated with a large corporate hub, then they probably have a corporate philanthropy or foundation of some sort. And those are good sources too to help provide money for your organization. All right, next, those are private sources. So when we talk about how to find grants, one more, there we go. If you're looking for public funding, these are the websites you should know. And I've geared this toward West Virginia because this is volunteer West Virginia, but if you were on a bordering state, most of the information will be the same, but some will be slightly different. The state sites will be different. So all federal grants are required to be listed in grants.gov. And it's just www.grants.gov. And you go in, you do not have to have an account to search. You can just pop onto the website and click. I think I'm going to show you here maybe. I can't remember if I cut that out of this one or not, but you click search and then you have keywords you can put in. And the keywords are important. So here's one of your pro tips, right? When you go to look for grants, you don't look for what you need. you look for the solution you're going to create, right? So if you need a van in your organization, you're not going to be able to find a grant by typing in van or automobile or car. That's how you're going to do what you're going to do. But what you're actually going to do is provide transportation for seniors, distribute food. You're going to take the team to the playoffs. You're going to do a public awareness campaign by putting signs on the side that increase their community's knowledge about Narcan, or whatever your organization does. So you're looking for funding sources. You would look for transportation grants. You would look for um, outcomes. So if you're, reducing hunger, maybe connecting seniors to their community, whatever it is you're going to do, that's what you look for when you do your search. That's your keywords. You're not going to be looking for a van. All right. That's one of the things that I want you to take away from here. You're going to focus on the solutions that you're offering and not just the need. Everybody needs vehicles. Everybody needs staff. Everybody needs computers. Everybody needs stuff. That's not going to get you a grant. Nobody owes you that. Nobody is waiting around to say, oh my, organizations A through F all need a van. Let's just do it. No, they want to see what you're going to do with it. They want to see why you want to do it and why they want to invest in your organization. So when you start doing your search, focus on your solutions. All right. So grants.gov is where all grants are listed. They are listed either as an active grant, meaning that there's a current deadline coming up, forecasted, meaning it's supposed to be coming, but we don't have all the details yet, or closed and archived. And that means the grant opportunity to apply for that grant has already ended, and you can still see the guidelines, but you can't apply at this time. So that's what they'll show up as in grants.gov. Now, to get a little bit ahead of the game, there's another pro tip. If you go to www.federalregister.gov, you can see the guidelines before they hit grants.gov. So you can go in and search by agency. If something has been forecasted on grants.gov and they're not showing you the guidelines yet, if you go to the Federal Register and search for that agency name, whether that's Department of Education, USDA, whoever the organization is you're wanting to apply to, you would go for the Federal Register and look for the guidelines there. Sometimes they have a comment period where you can review the guidelines and make suggestions. They'll say, we have a 30-day window for the public to discuss this grant and see what we want to, we've made some changes and we want to get buy-in, and you have the opportunity to write in your thoughts on that funding. This can be a very powerful tool, especially if it's taken something out that's crucial in order for the organization to run. If all of a sudden a HUD grant said, we can no longer provide housing to people under 30, then, and that, 30% of your caseload is all under 30 that are, have met all the other requirements to qualify for housing, then you might want to write in and say, hey, if we can reconsider this, these are the reasons that it would impact Appalachia significantly or would impact my community or whatever. So that's an opportunity that we don't always take advantage of. So federalregister.gov. Now, state funding. Some state funding comes from the federal government to the state, and then the state gives out the grants. All right. So those are still federal funds, but you're going to locate them on the state grants, state websites. And sometimes it's state tax dollars that they develop certain programs with. But in West Virginia, there's two ways to look up state grants. One is through grants.wv.gov, and the other is through the West Virginia OASIS system. When you go to grants.wv.gov, it'll give you some lists of what grants are out there. It's a little confusing. The website it's not really, in my opinion, not super user friendly to find everything you're looking for. It's better than what it used to be. 5 or 6 years ago, you had to go to every agency at the state to see what grant was available, unless there was, a major press release that listed several of them. But now you can go there and it'll at least tell you what agencies offer grants from time to time. But then it often sends you to the West Virginia OASIS website, which is where you'll get the grant guidelines and where you can submit them to the state. The grants um, portal through West Virginia OASIS is okay. It does its job, but you need to make sure that you give yourself extra time. And with any of these sources, if you're going to any of these portals, when you're going to apply, give yourself some time, because there are hiccups and there are closed, shutdowns and bandwidth issues where it'll kick stuff back. So you just need to be aware of that. But that's where you can find that information. All right. Now, the other place that I look for public funding is local newspapers, social media pages, and Google. I will set up alert notices that tell me when there's been a new Department of Education grant released, or if the state is offering, uh, uh, Family Resource Center grants. I put in some Google alerts to look for those things in press releases, and then I get an email that tells me, hey, this just came out. I also follow social media pages for all the agencies that I'm most likely to be looking for funding for, because they're going to post there where the next guidelines are, or if they're asking for comments, or you can kind of tell trends in their posts that something's coming up. You kind of see it building up to what's going on in some organizations. So those are my tips. Grants.gov for federal grants, just to see what's out there. Federal Register, if you're looking for a particular agency and a particular grant, you can find more detail there. And state grant website for finding out what's available at the state. Monitor your social media and local newspapers, and Google is always our friend. All right, next. So where do we find private funding? Very similar. However, a lot of the charity and corporations just have websites where they publish everything, and then they turn in their tax forms, which are their 990s, which all charitable organizations have to do. And then subscription services use those 990s to help narrow down the grant searches. So one of the subscription services that you can subscribe to is GrantStation. Honestly, that's the one I use most frequently. It is the most economical, and there are often really good deals through TechSoup to help you as a nonprofit get a good rate for them. And they are the current president is a West Virginia native, so she's very responsive to things when you ask questions too. So we like Alice, and we like the GrantStation. Also, the Foundation Directory Online is another one that I use. GrantStation, you can usually get, for under $200 a year. They have sales as low as $169. Sometimes you can get a little bit better deal than that, but that's a year. Foundation Directory is $100 to $200 a month, and then it goes up from there depending on what bells and whistles you want. Foundation Search is another. They both have some nice mapping tools that if you're looking for grants that are outside of West Virginia that will fund in West Virginia, you can often use those tools to find them. And GrantWatch is another one. I'm kind of hit or miss with GrantWatch. Another one that I have demoed and I really like is Instrumental. It is one that does a lot more grant tracking. GrantStation has added some of those features to theirs lately, but Instrumental has a few more bells and whistles. Again, it's more costly than GrantStation, but depending on how many grants, like if you write 1 or 2 grants a year, GrantStation's where you need to go. If you're writing 1 or 2 grants a week, then you might need Foundation Directory, Foundation Search, or Instrumental to track everything. That would be my recommendation. But honestly, where do I start? I start looking online at the charity or corporation's website. So for instance, if you are looking for, at what corporations are in your community, and you know that there is a CVS in your community, and you want to see who they give grants to or what kinds of grants they give. You go to the website and you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page. And you'll see all the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you'll see the grants that they give. And then you' And there's all this small print at the bottom of websites, right? I'm sure you've seen that before. And usually in corporation websites, you'll find one or two things. You'll find something that says corporate giving, or you'll find something that says about us, right? If you don't see corporate giving or grant giving or community impact, you'll find the about us. And you're going to look for those words in those menus. That'll take you to the website that talks about how to apply for grants to them. So if you look around your community and see what businesses are there and see what organizations are, part of a larger corporate chain, then you're more likely to be able to find the grant details for that. I also will use Google. If I know I'm going to be writing a grant for a playground, I will go to Google and I will put thanks to, or, thanks to question mark playground funded, or grant awarded to playground, and let Google do the work for me to find some. You can use AI for that. Sometimes the AI pulls stuff that is random because it's learned off other people's, but it can be used to do the search. But it's limited to just it's not good enough yet in my experience to find all those funding sources. I still find Google for a search to be better. And then from there, you might find a press release that says, this playground was built at such and such school, and it was thanks to donations from, and they list all the big donors that gave them money. And those can be then leads for you to look and see if in your community you have those same type of corporate donors or foundations that you can access. Okay, next. Any questions on where to start looking for funding? Federal grants, state grants, foundations, corporations. That's what we've talked about so far. Okay. Once you do a search, the next problem you run into is I have too many choices. I found all these things and I don't know where to go from here. There's just all these names. What do I do with them? Well, you need to narrow it down. You need to narrow your prospects down to a manageable list. And that manageable list depends on how many staff you have involved. Do you have in-house grant writers? Do you hire contracted grant writers? Do you have a board member that helps write grant? Where are you with that? So, that'll help you narrow down how many prospects you can really apply for at a time. You want to make sure it matches your need. One common mistake I see with nonprofits is that we chase money. We go through and say, oh, yeah, look at that. There's a grant. It's kind of what we do. I bet we can do it. Let's go after that money. It's money. We need some money. That is a risky thing to do for a nonprofit because what you end up doing is watering down your mission, and it's called mission drift or mission shift. And it is where your original intent of the organization gets lost because you're chasing money over here and then you go chase money over there. And then when this grant's done, it's not really part of your mission. So you're not going to keep going. So you got to find something else to try and keep those people employed or try and meet the services of your clients. So it's best to find grants that match you, not you matching the grant. So that means you're a little more selective. Just because money exists doesn't mean you need it. It's not going to fit. It's, even if somebody in the community says, here's $1 million, now I want you to do X, Y, and Z, and that's not what you do. It's okay to say, I'm sorry, we can't take your money because we don't do that. If you want us to support us in this mission, we'll do that. And that's a hard call to have and say, hey, wait a minute, I don't want your money. But it's important to the integrity and longevity of your organization that you stay within your mission and not jump all over the place. Okay. So first, the money should match your needs. Second, you should be eligible for it. It should be something that your organization is eligible. So when you find a grant, you want to read through the guidelines or the summary page and find out who's eligible. Sometimes there are limitations by geography. Maybe this money is only available to people in Tennessee. Maybe this money is only available for organizations that are affiliated with a church or not affiliated with a church, or only for organizations that are have a budget of under $50,000 a year or a budget over $5 million a year. There's different eligibility requirements. And you don't want to waste your time chasing after a grant that's not a good fit when you could be writing two or three grants that are and be getting the money. So you want to look at eligibility requirements, geography limitations. And one thing about geography, if your organization serves multiple counties, say, or multiple states, you want to make sure that the grant can be used in all the counties that you serve. If it can only be used in one county, you need to make sure that your proposal is limited to that county and that those funds will only be spent on services in that county. You don't want to get yourself in trouble later by overpromising and under-delivering or trying to do something that's not eligible. So just pay attention to the geography limitations. Award amounts. In your planning, you should know about how much money you need, right? And if you look at the amount of the award and it's not going to be anywhere near the amount of money you need, you have to ask yourself, is it worth going after this and then piling on several other grants so that we can build the total we need? Or is this just not a good fit? Do we need something that, if the grant's only $2,000 and you're going to spend staff time and planning time and getting everybody together and bringing all these partners in and everything for $2,000, but you need a minimum of 10 to get the project done, then you still got to find eight more. And, if you get it, can you finish it? You don't know. It might be better to look for a $10,000 grant. Now, it's also realistic to do. As nonprofits, we have to stack money all the time. We have to build um, things on top of each other to get the full budget covered. So that's okay to do that. Just break your project down into phases and to steps and do it in a way that's natural, that you're not, having to move money around, because then you're going to get yourself in trouble in audits. So you want to, keep things clear and separate. Another tip is if you see that a grant is offering $1 million grant, a lot of times we say, oh, that's great. I only need $10,000. That will be an easy one for them to fund because they've got 1 million. I just need 10. That still leaves them a whole bunch of money for everybody else. Nope. What that means is if they're giving grants at $1 million, they want $1 million projects submitted. They want projects that are going to cost $1 million. They want a larger scope. They want a larger service area. They want to see a larger change than those that are giving out $10,000 grants. So just because they award the money doesn't mean it's a good fit for you. You want to look at the competitiveness. Federal grants will often tell you how many they're going to award. Some state and foundations also do that. And if you are sitting in Buchanan like I am, and it is a local city grant, right? And you see that they're going to give out 8 grants. That's probably pretty good for a size of Buchanan. 8 nonprofits in our community could get that money. That's pretty good odds because we're a small town. But if it's a state grant and they're going to give out 8, then you realize you're going to be competing with organizations in all 55 counties. So therefore, your chances, the competitiveness goes up and your chances of getting it go down a little bit. So you have to make sure that you are exactly what this funding is looking for so that you're a good match to them and they're a good match to you. Now, if you're going to apply for a grant at the federal level and they're only going to give out 8 grants, then you're competing with all 50 states and all the counties within there and all the organizations in each one of those counties. So again, I'm not saying don't apply, but only apply if your organization can do exactly what they're asking for, and the amount of money that they're talking about awarding is exactly what you need, then it's worth going for it. But if you are just going we might be able to do this, or we could add this to our mission, because that's a lot of money, we want to apply for it. We might be one of the 8. You probably aren't. So you might be better to spend your time on those that are going to be a little less competitive, unless it's something that's exactly what you do. And you have a track record of being able to do that. But most of the time, you're going to be applying for, if you've never written a grant before, most of the time you're going to be applying for private funding. You're going to be applying to foundations, community foundations that are in your area, local businesses, corporations, those kind of things. That's where you're going to start. and you're going to build your capacity and build your experience so that then you're more competitive at the state level and then you're more competitive at the federal level. One common mistake I see is small startup nonprofits going, hey, but we're going to get a federal grant. No, you're not. Unless you have partners that are willing to help you and be a fiscal agent and do some other things, you're probably not going to get a federal grant in your first year as a nonprofit. You're going to look at building up your capacity and showing that you can manage money and showing that you can reach your goals and building that case of why you're a good investment for a larger grant. So just keep that in mind. You also want to look at the reporting requirements when you're planning, looking at which grants to apply for. Because if you are a small nonprofit, if it's just you and a volunteer board, and this grant requires you to report out heavy detail every 2 weeks, you may not be, it's going to be more headache than it's going to be worth getting the money. So you might want to look and see, do we have the capacity to manage that? Or if it asks for a particular type of database that you have to subscribe to, or that you have to be able to turn in reports that your current QuickBooks account can't do, and you need to have something more expensive to do it. If it doesn't allow you to write that in the grant, then it may not be something that's a good fit. So you just need to be aware of those things. If you don't see that information on the website, but you can find a program officer's phone number, call them, email them, ask those questions. That will help you. That's their whole job, is just to answer questions. So don't be afraid to ask. That's what they do. They're not going to judge you or look down on you. They get asked the same questions all the time. They're not going to be upset about it. They're going to answer the question and give you advice and maybe tell you, yep, this is a perfect grant for you to apply for. Or, this one doesn't really seem like a good fit, but we have another category that you might fit into, right? So don't be afraid to talk to the program officer. All right, you want to look at the grant time period. If you are planning a summer camp, right? Right now it is May, and you want to have a camp in July. You're not going to get a grant now, okay? Grants take anywhere from usually 45 days to a year to announce that they're going to give you the money, depending on when you apply and when they review and when they make the announcements and when they get the money to you. So if there is, you want to do a summer camp, but this grant isn't due until September, that's not a good fit. Or if you want to, you need the money by January, you want to find a grant that's due July, August, so they have time to review it and check on it and get everything worked out so you'd have the money in time. And so that's important. That's your anticipated award dates. And there's also the grant time period. If you're trying to construct a building, you have a grant that only runs for 6 months, you're not going to get done in time. That's not a good fit. But if the grant is a 2-year grant, that'll probably give you enough time to buy the property, deal with your construction company or your architects or whatever you need, and then get it built. The time period is important too. So that helps you narrow down your prospects. So you get your first list of all those all those grants that are out there, and then you need to look through them and narrow it down to the top. So many. When we do funding searches for nonprofits, we come back with somewhere between 8 and 12 grants as a starter. That we narrow everything down that's out there to the ones that we think are the best fit. Then from those 8 to 12, we sit down with the client, with the organization, and go through them in detail and prioritize which of those we're going to apply. Sometimes we'll say, okay, these are the 3 that we're going to do, and then we'll see what happens next, and we'll come back to the list later. Or we may say, okay, we think these 6 are where we're going to go. Let's focus on those and get those submitted. So it's realistic to have a large list and then funnel them down to those that are realistic and reasonable for you to do in your time. Okay, so let's get into some more tips here on how to do that. Okay, when you go to write a grant, you have to be able to answer all of these questions. So this is where that 80% of planning comes out. You plan for what do we want to do, kind of just your basic thing. But then you want to plan for what kind of funding is out there. You want to be able to answer who, where, what, why, how, when, what will be different and how will we know, and how much it will cost now and to continue it after the grant. We're going to break each one of these down here. So let's go ahead on to the next one. We're going to talk about who. So in each grant, you're going to need to know or anticipate that you'll have to answer questions about who is the organization, who are the key people in that organization, who's the key personnel, who are your partners, and who is the target population served. So the organization's pretty much the easiest one, right? You know who you work for or which operation you're executive director of. You know where you are. Key people. Now, key people isn't everybody that works in the organization. It's just those that are going to be necessary to carry out the tasks you're asking for the funding to be paid for, right? So if your organization provides recovery support and you are asking for money for a day center where people can come in, walk in, come in, hang out, get information, be in a supportive environment. You want a day center. You're not going to write into the grant the people who run your recovery housing. You're not going to write into the grant necessarily all your transportation people or anybody who is doing therapy. However, you might have somebody who helps with financial planning come into the day center and offer a class. Or you may have a case manager or a coordinator that's an information and referral that can get people to the services they need. Those are the key personnel for that project. Not that the other people aren't key for your organization, but each grant you have to focus on just the project you're asking for. And key partners. It is very rare that an organization can do everything that they need to do without partners, right? Um, we don't always call them partners, but they are the people that you partner with on a day-to-day basis. That's people who make referrals to you. That's people you make referrals to. That's those who do complementary services. Again, going back to the recovery example, your partner might be a, a probation office. You may have partners with a clinic or a drug testing clinic or a therapy. You may have standard partners that you work with all the time. Just be aware of who they are and think about that as you're planning who could be a potential partner in this particular scope of project. And the target population served. This includes, the average age of the type of people you're going to serve, the location where they live, all that demographic data that we collect on everybody, right? So that you can tell who your average client is. That helps the funder to know what the solution is, who's going to be impacted by the solution you're offering. It could be youth, it could be pets. If you're doing spay and neuter programs, it could be uh, individuals, could be families, it could be the community. If your grant is to develop a new bus system in your community because there's no transportation, then your client is your whole community, right? And so that's who your target population is. Okay, next. And where? You have to remember when you're writing a grant that the people reviewing the grant don't know anything about your community unless they're currently located in your community, right? But most of the time when you're writing a grant, you're writing to a foundation, a corporation, a state level organization, or federal grants, and they don't know anything about where you live. It's your job to explain a description of the area, provide some demographics, explain the location if you have multiple locations, things like that. I was on a federal grant review one time, and the grant we were working on had points that you would get if you're working with low income people. One of the grants came in from a rural community, and two of the reviewers on my committee were from larger metropolitan areas. And they were adamant that this one grant couldn't be true because they were a rural area, therefore they wouldn't have any poverty because they're not inner city. So in their mind, there was only poverty in inner city communities and not rural communities. So it's important to explain in your proposal about where you are. If you're applying to a grant that's based out of Charleston and you're located in Monroe County, you probably have to explain what Monroe County is because people who live in downtown Charleston may not know. You have to explain a little bit about what it's like. So don't be afraid to do that in your proposals. And again, you don't have to write a whole dissertation on each one of these. Some grants you'll be limited to 2,000 words, so you're not going to be able to write all this. Some you're limited to so many characters per space. But you need to be able to answer the questions so that when you get into the guidelines, you know you have the information you need to use to develop the answer the questions they ask. Okay, so who and where. Let's go to next. All right, so where are you going to find in the proposal where to put the information on who and where? They're all called, are we getting a weird echo? Let's see that in the chat. Okay, some say yes, some say no. Okay. Um, there's introduction is a category, organizational information, agency background, target population, key personnel, partnerships, collaborations. All of these categories may show up in a grant guideline. They may use one, they may use two or three, they may use all of these. But as long as you can answer who and where, we've talked about in the last couple of slides, you should be able to answer any of these questions in a grant. So that's how I practice. I've been writing grants for 30 years, and that's what we do. We look at who and where, and then we know if we can answer that, we're ready to jump into the grant. Okay, next. Let's see if we can get our sound good. Okay, then the next thing you need to be able to describe is what. And this is a brief description of what you want to accomplish with this funding. All right, this is where we're focusing on that solution to the problem. This is what we call your elevator speech. This is telling the reader up front what you have planned. So when you, as an employee at a nonprofit, and your neighbor says, "What do you do for a living?" And you say, this is what you tell them. This is how you explain what you do for a living. It's that elevator speech. It's the mission statement of your organization. It's the purpose of your project. So what you're doing might be, we're going to reduce the pet, the feral pet cat or the feral cat population in our community by doing spay and neuter programs. Or we're going to help kids who are aging out of foster care have the skills they need to stand on their own 2 feet or attend college. We're going to help reduce homelessness in our community. That's what you're going to do. It's not, we're going to buy a van. It's not, we're going to hire 2 new staffs, right? That's how you're going to get it done. But what you're going to do is that solution. So if you leave here with nothing else today, remember that grants are all about the solution to the problem. Stay focused on that, and it'll get you much farther in the review process than just a list of things you need. Okay, next. Where do we put the what in a proposal? Sometimes it's the purpose. Sometimes they ask for a brief project description. Sometimes they limit you to a sentence describing the program. So you want to be able to break down the project into a short, quick description of what you're going to do, and it has to include that solution. So let me think of another example. If you're going to develop a scholarship program, what you're actually doing is reducing college debt of students by or preventing them from taking on more college debt, or you're increasing the access to the program for low-income students or for those with promise. That's another term that's used, promising students with financial need. You're reducing any roadblocks for them achieving the goal. So that's what you're going to do. It's not providing scholarships. It's not providing software. It is teaching something or doing something. Okay, next. The next section is why. And this is important. Very important that you yourself and your organization understand this. But it seems intimidating when you first start listening to what I'm about to tell you. Not everything has to be in great, great detail, but you do have to have a good issue or good understanding around this. So the why is the problem or issue that you are creating the solution for. You have to explain the need in some way. We do this with statistics. If you have organizational data that says, we have lots of challenges with housing. We have a low affordable housing stock, or we have a large number of cat colonies, or we have um, dilapidated housing, whatever the problem is, you're going to talk about it in this part. You're going to explain it. And it may be statistics that you get from uh, the census data. If you're talking about poverty issues, you may get data from um, health organizations if you're talking about health outcomes that you want to change. If you want to deal with poverty related issues, you may be talking about those things that contribute to, the social determinants of health that help impact your health, as well as things that lead to ongoing poverty, such as lack of education or a lack of transportation or lack of housing, all those things that are um, conditions of poverty that there's causes and conditions, and there's different ways to map it. All that information's out there somewhere. Google searching will get you started. Lots of ways to find information that is valid. What you can't do is just say, I think this. I think that kids need to know more about math. So therefore, I want to teach math. That's not enough. You need to say the issue is that 60% of our second graders are not testing above um, average on the national tests. Then you have some statistics. Or in our school, 20% of students are failing their math class. Whatever statistics you have already available is what you want to use. If you can't find statistics, for instance, when you're talking about little pantries, food pantries, and free libraries and things like that, there's not a lot of statistics out there on that because it's volunteer clients who come and get what they need, and then they are not necessarily reporting how they're using the information, those kind of things. There's not necessarily statistics, but you could give a case example. So you may be able to say, for instance, with their permission, of course, this person um, lost their job. They were temporarily um, uh, limited on food access. They had been to the local pantries, and they had been to the Department of Health and Human Services to help them get some food. But the time period it was going to take for that paperwork to be processed, they were going to be hungry. They were able to go and get 3 meals from this box, and they left me a thank you note and explained this is how it really impacted their life. That's something that you could use to make it real to people. And you're explaining how it all fits together. Also, if you live in a community and the why is that there's a gap in services, that there's nobody providing transportation, or there's nobody out there that is helping with veterans, or nobody out there who is currently, clients are falling through the gaps between stage 1 and 2 of whatever's going on, and you're proposing something to fill that gap. Then you can explain that in narrative with any data that you have or statistics. And you want to look at the impact on clients and community. If there's been a large employer close down in your community, which a lot of us have seen, right? It does have a large ripple effect on the community, from not just necessarily the people who were laid off, but then other people who were currently looking for jobs, trying to fill in jobs when other people were, the people who were laid off are getting the jobs and all those things. So you may have to describe the situation in your community that others outside of the community don't see and don't know. So that's the why. You want to be able to make the case, pull on those heartstrings, get the reader invested on, oh no, this is not good. I want to be able to help these people. I want to be able to get involved and invest in helping this change. So that's the why. So on the next slide, we'll talk about where in a grant proposal do you include the why. All right. So we have, go back one there. Oh, is there one more back? Nope. Okay, we're gonna go with the examples. Sorry. Next one. All right. Um, these are some examples of where you can find data if you need data. I'm not going to read through each one of these. You'll get the slides to look at them. But there are lots of sources out there for different types of data. So, and I'm sure if I opened this microphone up and said, everybody tell me where you get data when you need it to tell your board or do a press release or something, you all have different sources that you use. Don't use Wikipedia. That's not good enough for a grant. Don't use uh, just a news article unless it cites a source. If you just say that CBS News says, well, no, that's not enough. You need to say CBS News is going to quote that data from somewhere else. So go to the original source whenever you can for explaining how something has come about. If there are no data sources out there, it's okay to use your organization's data to say we've observed, or we get calls 4 times a week of people looking for a ramp to get into their home because their stairs are not they have mobility issues and can't get into the stairs. Well, you've identified a need because of these phone calls that you're getting, and you're trying to fill that need and you need some money to do it. That's all legit, but you have to keep track of those calls so you can actually show this is how that happened. Okay, next. All right. Now, there are lots of free research tools out there that can help you find this data. If you don't know where it is, or you can't get your hands on it readily, here's ways to do it. There are lots of journals and databases available through your local libraries. If you can either go to the library and ask them how to find the database, or usually on their websites, there's some instructions on how to look it up. You can type in things such as best practices in recovery housing or impact studies for spay and neuter programs, or the impact of nutrition programs or food delivery programs on nutrition. Whatever it is that you're wanting to know, and you think you feel that this is why it's important, try and find an article that can back that up. Two other sources that are out there is Google Scholar and Microsoft Academic. You can pull those from home on any computer, and I just do a search. So, for instance, in Google, when you look at Google, there's like these little 9 squares in the corner. If you click on that, it'll give you a pop-up menu of lots of other choices. Google Scholar's in there. Or you can just go to the Google menu bar and type in Google Scholar, and it'll take you to the search tool for that. It is a separate search tool that looks at academic journal articles and can pull information for you. Now, when you do it that way, there's a lot of articles that are behind a paywall that you cannot get into the full article. However, they often provide you with the summary of that article and sometimes a bibliography or the references that article uses. So how I do it is if I get an article on Google Scholar and I can't get to the full article, then I look at who else they referenced, and we'll search some of those articles till I can find one that fits. And this is something that you really don't have to do every day. If you have time, if you set aside a little bit of time to do a search, get a few things started, you're going to be able to use those same articles over and over and over again. Update them once a year, maybe. Good opportunity for a volunteer or a work study student to do some research for you and find out what's out there and help you create this need statement. Another website is science.gov, depending on if you're doing research or not. That's one that has a lot of resources. And AI, it is improving. If you're using ChatGPT to search for research articles, I would say something like, act as a grant writer and provide me 10 sources that justify or that explain the impact of whatever your project is. It's going to give you something. Now, it's not necessarily going to give you the latest articles. It's not necessarily going to give you ones that directly relate, because if you talk about recovery, it's going to go into recovery of muscles It's going to go into recovery of the ecosystem. It's going to go into, it's going to pull things that are elsewhere. So you have to dig into it. You can't just take that list and say, yep, there's my list. You have to do a little bit more digging to make sure that it's a good match. But it is improving. It's getting a little better at being able to be a tool for that. Okay, next. So once you've identified why you're doing what you're doing, which you know at your heart, but once you have some data to show that this is why we're doing it, you would put that in the proposal, maybe under problem statement. Sometimes they'll ask it for a need statement. Sometimes they just say issues and challenges. Depending on the guidelines and the grant, it'll come in a different place, but they really want to know just why. Why are we doing this? Why do you want us to invest? So that's important to note. Um, why is a big point value in a grant? Like when you write a grant, the reviewers look at it and give you points for each section. And why is one of those that's pretty big point value. So don't skimp on this. Now, if you're writing a grant and all you have to do is write a one-page letter, you're going to write one or two sentences about this. You're not going to write a whole bunch. But if you're applying for a grant and they give you a whole, they want a page or a half page on this information, you're going to want to spend a little bit of time and explain how you came up to it. So it just depends on the grant, but don't miss the points by not answering this. Okay, next. All right, how? This is the one that's worth the most points in any grant, is the how section. This is also why you decided to write a grant in the first place, right? Really why is what do you need, right? What are you going to do? Wouldn't it be nice if we had money we could do X, Y, and Z? That's the how part, right? So that's where you're going to spend most of your time in the proposal explaining. And the how includes the action steps. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? Um, how the partners are involved, who's responsible for what. If you're going to hire staff, the executive director or a program director might be involved in hiring staff. HR, maybe if you have an HR department is involved. Who's going to provide referrals for clients? Is that a case manager? Is that administrative assistant? Who's the person that's out there making referrals? Who is going to be tracking the data that you have to collect in order to show that you did what you said you were going to do? Is that the executive director? Do you have a program director that's going to be responsible for this one? Is it a team effort? How do you do it? You need to think through these things and know how it's all going to fit together. When you're applying for federal grants, they're also going to want to know what evidence do you have that this plan should work? And that goes back to your journal articles. What are some of the impacts? What are some of the best practices? What are things that are out there that have been a proven success and that you're going to apply in your community? A lot of the foundations and corporation grants, they don't ask that much information, but federal grants, state grants, and federal grants may ask for that. The how section is where you really get the reader excited. You're going to really expand on the solutions that you're proposing and how it's going to work and what it's going to look like. This is where you want to be descriptive and spend the most time. And when you're writing a grant, don't worry about your writing style. Your writing style is only important if they can't understand what you mean. But there's not a particular way to write it. You want to write compelling, but you're not going to, word choice isn't as important as you think it might be. So write it like you would tell somebody and then go back and clean it up for any confusion. As you can tell, when I talk, I do a lot of, it's kind of like this or it's kind of like that. And here's a little bit of this thing. And, I'm not very formal in my discussion. And that's how I write all my first drafts. I just sit down and type what is on my mind. Then as I'm typing, I'll get to a point where I can't answer this part of the question yet. I need more information. But instead of stopping and going to look for that information, I have a trick. I just type the words lobster, 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 and then I go to the next question. Because research shows that if you're in the zone and you stop working, it takes almost like a half hour. I think it's like 25 minutes and some change to get back to where you were when you were in the zone. So it's better just to skip and move forward. And then you go back and search for the places that you skipped. That's why I use lobster, because working in West Virginia, it is very unlikely that I am writing a grant that has the word lobster in it anywhere. So it's a quick word I can go back and find, and then I can answer that question. Some people just type in all caps, I need to come back to this. Some people put other keywords that make sense to them or names or something that, um, whatever makes sense to you. Some people highlight that section. But for me, if I can just keep typing, I just type those words and move to the next question and keep going. And then anytime I get to a point where I know I need to go find out something else, I just type in lobster and move on. Then I go back, find the lobsters, and then I make a list of all the things I need to look up. That's my tip. Okay. But you want to be descriptive and you want to get the reader engaged. The how is where the meat and bones are. We're going to buy a van, we're going to provide transportation, we're going to see, we're going to spay and neuter 200 animals over the course of a year. We're going to whatever you're planning to do, how you're going to do it. We're going to work with a vet. We're going to work with a shelter. We're going to work with an after school program. We're going to, have an event that creates awareness. We're going to help reduce stigma of what's going on by having community campaign or education sessions, whatever it is you're going to do. This is, why you need the money. I mean, really, really need the money. That's in the how section. Okay, next. All right. So where do you put the how? Every grant's different. Sometimes they ask for it in a scope of work. And that just really means what is the work you're going to do? Sometimes they ask for an action plan. Sometimes they call it your methods. What are your methods to getting this done? Sometimes they want to see your implementation plan. But those all mean the same things. How are we going to do it? What's going to happen? Okay, next. Another important part of how is knowing when. Reviewers want to see that you have a plan in place for when things are going to happen and that it's realistic. Like you can't say starting on day one for a brand new program, you're going to offer services to 150 people. Don't you have to hire the staff first? Probably. Don't you have to order the curriculum that you need the money for? Probably. You want to put those things in of how you can do it. I usually break things down into months or quarters. If it's a 1 year grant, I do it by month. If it's 2 or more years or more than a year grant, I'll do quarters, so quarter one, two, three, and four, year twos, quarters one, two, three, and four, like that. Um, Now, you don't have to know exactly to the day, right, of when you're going to do things, but you'll know in your community how long does it take you to hire somebody? How long does it take to order something and get it set up? How long does it take to advertise your programs? Or maybe you need to develop some partnerships leading into this. And how many meetings do you have to have before you feel like you're ready to partner? All those things you think about that often stop us from doing the work. It's okay to think about them and include them in your timeline for a grant. Most grants allow you time to plan. Some will say you have to be out of planning and into implementation within 3 months or 4 months. Some don't say that at all, and they just leave it up to you to say. Sometimes you can apply for a grant that is all planning. You have a whole year to plan for what's going to happen. So just be realistic in what you're going to do. Um, and like my little picture here, you can do charts. I often do those just in Excel and highlight or put X's in the months where things are going to happen. Or you can just do it in a bulleted statement of, in January, we're going to do this. In February, we're going to do that. But that makes the reader see, okay, yeah, you've thought this through. Um, One thing that's really important, if you're asking for equipment, don't wait to put the equipment in at the end of the grant period. You're going to want to buy the equipment near the beginning of the grant because then the reviewers go, oh, I see why they need it. If you don't buy the grant until the end or the equipment till the end, they're like, you didn't need it for this project. You're going to use it for something in the future and not for what we have. So it's not a good use of money. So you want to put your equipment purchases up front or in a reasonable amount of time. Maybe you have to have training first and then you buy it, whatever, but make sure it's realistic. Yeah, and I will get into that in just a second there, Frank. We're going to talk about the difference between goal and objective and outcome. Yeah, in a minute. We'll come back to that. Okay, go ahead. All right, so where does when show up? In a timeline, a time frame, or a schedule? That one's pretty obvious, but they do want to know when. Another thing that funders want to know is, are you going to be able to hit the ground running when I give you this money, or are you going to be uh do you need 6 months after you get the money to actually start spending it? They want to know how long it's going to sit there. Because if it's going to be a year, they might suggest that you come back and apply next year so that they can give the money to somebody else who's ready to hit the ground running. So timelines are important to reviewers. Okay, next. So now we're going to talk about, as Frank pointed out, this is important. What is going to be different because we had this money, and how do we know it's different? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself. There are lots of terms that get tossed around in the grant world, and there are different meanings for each one. When you sit down to do your evaluation plan or a logic model or whatever they ask for in the what is different and how do we know, you want to know the difference of what they mean. So your goal is the overall big picture, right? My goal is to reduce homelessness of all people living in Upshur County, right? That's my goal. Is that a realistic goal? Maybe not, but that's my goal. So my realistic goal might be to reduce homelessness by 20% in the next 12 months. That's still ambitious, right? That's a big goal. My objectives are what is measurable that's related to that goal. So yeah, I'm going to end homelessness as the goal. My objectives are what percentage and for whom, right? You're going to break that down. Your objectives should be measurable. We'll talk about SMART and SMARTY here in a minute and how you break those down into being measurable goals. Then one of the things that's often included in grants, they'll ask for either your methods, your activities, or your outputs, right? And then they want to know about your outcomes and impacts. So a lot of times people get confused between outputs and outcomes. So this is how I break that down. The outputs are what you or the client actually put out there, right? You just reverse it. You put it out there. We offer a class, they show up. Those are outputs. They are things that happen that are measurable, but they don't indicate change, right? They're activities, they're things that are happening. So your outputs are what you're going to do. So we're going to offer 5 classes a year for 10 students each class, and the students are going to attend and complete activities. Those are all outputs. We put it out there, the client puts their time and effort out there, and that is outputs. Now, what are the outcomes? That's what comes out of what you did, right? So again, you reverse it. What comes out because we put these things out there? Your outcomes are going to be students received a GED. The students received a degree. We were able to improve health outcomes for I don't know, smokers who reduced smoking by such a percentage. Those are your outcomes. And the impacts are little longer term outcomes, right? So you can have outcomes such as a GED, a graduation, you got a driver's license. That's great. But what are the impacts of those outcomes? You're able to get a job, or you're qualified for a job, you have transportation because you got a vehicle, which allows you to then get a job. You've increased your health, and therefore you have less sick days at work. What are those long-term impacts, which help your finances? Those impacts. And then sometimes they ask about indicators of impacts. So how do you know it actually happened? Well, if someone gets housing, they're going to have a lease or a deed to their property, right? So that is an indicator that that impact occurred. Another indicator might be the grades that you receive or your case notes that the case managers track and show progress. Maybe it's a rubric where people have moved up a scale. What indicators are you going to use? That's important, especially for federal grants. Most foundation and corporation grants, they don't get into the indicator piece, but the larger grants, the more money you apply for, the more detail they want. So that's where indicators become very important. And indicators can be anything that you use to measure it. It could be a pre and post test, could be a survey, can be copies of deeds, could be mileage logs. I mean, all kinds of different things you could use for impacts. Okay. So questions about this lingo. Does anybody need me to clarify something or go back over it? Okay, let's move on. All right, so we talked about objectives, and objectives need to be measurable. And so you'll often see in a grant guideline that they ask for SMART or SMARTY objectives. And what that means, it's the first letter of these following things. Your objectives, which are you have your big goal, and then what are the objectives of this project? This project's going to do what? Needs to be specific. So what is the goal what is the objective, or what part of the goal are you trying to realize? It needs to be measurable by how much, how often, how many. And that could be, we're going to serve 10 people, or 50% of participants will achieve such and such, that it needs to be measurable. Yep. Federal grantors definitely want measurable details. How much, how often, how many? That's important. And then attainable is the A. Is this really achievable? If you are a brand spanking new nonprofit, you have you're entirely run by a volunteer board. Is it achievable to think that you're going to be able to completely eradicate homelessness in your community in 6 months? No, that's not achievable. That's not attainable. If it is, somebody would have packaged it and sold it already, right? Right? That's not possible. So you want to talk about things that are achievable and attainable. I never put that we're going to achieve 100% of anything, or that 100% of participants will reach success. There are too many variables you can't control. Somebody could move away and leave the program. Somebody could be ill and hospitalized and not able to complete. There could be another pandemic and we have to shut things down. You never put 100%, right? You put what is achievable. And so when you think back to baseball, somebody who has a 30% batting average, meaning that 3 out of every 10 bats, they hit the ball, they're considered very successful, right? So it's all relative into what you're doing. If you're working with people who have a lot of trauma, people who have a lot of failed experiences in programs for various reasons, some are their own and some are other, external factors they can't control. It's not realistic to think that they're going to be able to achieve 100%. So you have to give yourself a realistic answer. So right now you look at how you do that is you look at the data you already have. If you've been working with clients and you know that you get somebody into housing and 18 months from them, you know that 40% are still housed. Well, that's good for that 40%, but you want to get it a little higher than that. So maybe your goal is to get to 45% this year and 50% next year, right? You want to base it on something that you know and build it up. That you can't expect everything to be 100%, just because of the nature of humanity and what we do as nonprofit workers. You also want your goals and objectives to be relevant. If you are working on a grant that is focusing on employment, one of the measurements probably is not going to be reducing obesity. Now, if you reduce obesity, does that make it easier for people to get to work and be healthy? Yes, it does. But is it a direct line in any of the research to show that that's the one thing that gets you a job? No. Things that are more well documented are education, transportation, training, skills, those kind of things are relevant to the outcome, the solution that you're trying to provide. And also, you want it to be time-based. It's important for reviewers and readers to know when something's going to happen and that time frame is realistic. So again, if you're working on workforce development and someone needs to go through a training course and then have an apprenticeship and then get apply for a job, that's not going to happen in a month. You make sure your timeline that by the end of the year, you'll have this many people in your apprenticeship program with 20% of them graduated and seeking employment and 10% of those that started already employed. You want to be realistic on your timeline at the end of that year. Okay. Now, some grants have included the IE at the end of SMART. Some have taken it off in recent years because of federal language restrictions, but I want to tell you what they are. So if you see a grant that says Smarty, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. That means inclusive and equitable. So what do they mean by inclusive? How do you include underrepresented voices and share power with them? So what that boils down to is if I am developing a program as a woman, and this program is for men, have I asked any men if it's really needed? No. Then maybe it's needed, maybe it's not. Have I asked any men, would they be willing to participate in this type of program? Same kind of thing happens with any population that you're working with. If you are working with LGBTQ uh, community and you are proposing a program and you don't have any representation of those voices in the planning or in an advisory capacity moving forward, or there's opportunities that you'll miss ways that are unintentionally keeping people out and not feeling that they're included. So sometimes just asking a simple question or two is one way to get that out there. Be open to hearing what your clients are telling you. If you have a number of clients are saying we have trouble getting housing because of A, B, and C, then you want to make sure people that are facing A, B, and C are involved in planning the process of how you're going to do that solution. That's what they look for in inclusive. And equitable means, is there anything in the systems around us that keep people from participating? That could be something as simple as we're going to have a nutrition program and it's located on the second floor of our building. However, the elevator is broken and there's no way to get there. So people with mobility issues, seniors, people in wheelchairs, people who can't climb stairs for one reason or another, people with strollers can't participate because they can't get to the building where the meal's being offered. So equitable, it could be simply moving it down to the first floor. That's what they mean by equitable. So when you're planning things, if a grant, most aren't asking this anymore, but some are, if they ask for inclusive and equitable, that's what they're looking for. Are you including everybody? And are there any things that we need to think about of why it's not everybody has equal access to it? Right. But most of the time, you're going to just see SMARTs: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Federal grants are not asking the inclusive and equitable questions anymore. 4 or 5 years ago, that was on all grants. So you just have to look and see what's out there. Some foundations still have included it, some don't. So, and that's another pro tip I will give you. My experience with the federal government right now is that there are keywords that are getting flagged or have been flagged. And the main thing, when I'm on a grant review for the federal government, they have told us that you don't read into it looking for if somebody is being inclusive or providing equitable services. You just need to make sure that it says we're going to serve everybody and that there's no limits on who can be served. So don't change your mission. Don't worry about what what the federal government is going to say or not say. Don't change who you are as an organization. Keep doing what you're doing. The needs were there before, the needs are there now. You're still doing it. We just need to be cautious in our wording that we're not excluding anybody by limiting things to one population. So if you are working with LGBTQ individuals and communities, then you can still do that, but you have to say, you have to be that the services are open to everybody. That can be allies, that can be education programs, that can be, anybody can come in and talk about their issues and whatever the topic is you're talking about. Same thing if you are an organization that works with African Americans, you still can include that you work with African Americans, but you can't limit federal funded sources to only African Americans in the current structure. So that is the advice I've been given, and I'll pass it along. It could change, but that's what we're at right now. But don't change your missions. That's one thing that I saw a lot of organizations do early on, was take things out of your goal and try and change what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. It's just when you're asking for the money, just be open about your services are open to everybody. Okay, next. All right, so where are you going to put the answers to what will be different and how will we know in your grant proposal? You're going to include that in your goals and objectives. That could be one section they ask for it. They might call it your impact statements. They may ask for an evaluation plan, and they may say, do a logic model. Now, when people hear the word logic model, in some cases, people panic. But I'm just going to tell you right now, all that a logic model is a spreadsheet summary of everything else you've already got in the grant. So if you've answered all your questions, who, what, when, where, why, and how, and what will be different, you can put all that into a logic model. The logic model wants to know, what are you putting into the program? That's part of the who and the what. They want to know, what activities are you going to do? That's your how. They want to know what your outcomes are going to be. That's where we talked about what would be different. And they want to know who's responsible, and your timeline. So you've already answered all those questions. If you've gone through the questions we laid out, it's just a matter of putting it in a spreadsheet simplified so a reviewer can look at it quickly. So don't let the logic model panic you. Each organization, each federal organization, agency has its own logic model. There's not one standard one out there. Foundations have their own logic models that they use. So as long as you can answer the questions, you just drop them into the right boxes and you'll be able to do that. Same with an evaluation plan. Sometimes in federal grants, they'll ask for a little more detail on why this evaluation should work, but most state, local, and foundation grants don't ask for that. So only if you're applying to federal funds do you really have to worry about some of the details. Okay, next. The next question is the budget, and that is how much. Now, in some grants that I'm working on, I start with a budget. I kind of have a rough idea of how I want the program to go, or how the organization wants their program to go. And then I start with a budget to see what I can fit into the allowable money. So if I know I only have $10,000 in this particular grant, I'm going to look at the budget and say, okay, so where can I find a $10,000 piece of this project? And then I start with the budget. I often do that as well for larger projects, for federal grants that are going to be 5 years. Then I kind of map out a budget and then figure out how many people I'm going to need, and how many miles are they going to travel, how many conferences they have to go to, all those things. You map it all out in a budget, and that's not going to be your final budget, but that's where I start. And then I go back and finish answering all the questions and then update the budget as I go. But that kind of helps me limit my scope to what money is available. If the funder says we can give you $50,000, then I'm going to start there so I can figure out what a $50,000 project looks like. Now, it's not required. Any of these questions I have asked, you can start there. You can start with the who, you can start with the how, you can start with any section of it, but you just need to be able to tie them all together so that they make sense and flow together from one point to another. Okay, so what do you include in your budget? You want to include all costs associated with the project, and they all need to relate back to the how section that you're talking about. So if you have an item in your budget that you haven't talked about in the grant anywhere else, that's going to put up a red flag for the reviewers and go, well, why do you need that? That doesn't make any sense. You didn't talk about that at all. So you're going to want to go back and say, make sure it ties back to how you're going to do it. You don't want to mention for the first time that participants are going to get a new laptop in the budget if you've never mentioned that they need a laptop to carry out the activities earlier on. So, just be careful of that. You do want to base your budget on real costs. While it is a good guess, we can't guarantee prices won't go up and down. You do want to be realistic so you don't get yourself in a pickle after you get the grant and you can't carry out the goals because you didn't put in enough money. And so to find how much stuff costs, I literally go online, check prices on Amazon for supplies, Walmart, Target, wherever, and see what kind of how much is it going to cost to get basic office supplies that you're going to need. Or maybe if you're setting up a new staff, you're going to need some office furniture. So I'll go look and see how much that costs. And then I just base it on my best guess of what's out there. Travel, there is a federal rate for travel reimbursement, and a lot of organizations just use whatever the federal rate is. If your organization uses a different mileage reimbursement rate, you want to include that. So if you're not an administrator, find out from your administrator what those rates are. Things like personnel, you want to find out what the average is in your organization. And if you are new starting out and don't have an organization, you want to find out what an average is in your area. Now, when you go to places like salary.com, they're going to give you national data. They give you West Virginia data, but it is still not, you still need to get area specific. So if you are in an area where there's a lot of competition for the jobs, they're going to pay more. If you're the only shop in town, there may or may not be as high of a wage on average for your employees. So that all is dependent on where you are and who you are. So do some research on what's working. Look at other ads. I go on LinkedIn and see what other people are offering to pay positions in that area I'm in, or maybe the next county over, and kind of get an idea to start from. But it is all relative. But one important thing to remember is just because you are a nonprofit organization, it doesn't mean you can't make money as an employee. You can pay yourself. The organization can pay you. So don't skimp on that. Don't volunteer all the time when there's a grant out there that could pay you. Ask for the money. Everybody else does. You should too. It's important to value your employees and value yourself so that you can have the buy-in and the loyalty to continue programs and continue growing. So that's just my little speech for that. Okay, and in your budget, check your math. You definitely want to make sure that everything adds up. There are those reviewers who are sticklers for the math, and they want to know that everything adds up, and that is an indication that you're going to be a good steward of their money. If you can make your math, if you got a lot of math mistakes, they're going to go, they can't balance my checkbook. I'm not going to give them any money. So you want to check your math. Now, some grants require matching funds. Not all. Most foundations and corporate gifts don't. There's a few that do, but most don't. But if you get into federal funds, sometimes there's more requirements for matching funds. And what matching funds are is a commitment of funding from you or partners to match the money you're going to get from the funding source, from the grant. So you need to think to yourself while you're planning the project, do we have any matching funds? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean cash. It could mean space rentals. It could mean if you have another funding that's paying for okay. It could be, if you're paying for a staff person who's going to be doing the exact same job they're already doing just for more clients, you can't necessarily, that could be in kind. They don't necessarily have to be paid. If their job description is going to change and they're doing something new, then you could put that money in the grant to pay them for the additional work or change of scope or whatever. But that's all. I could do a whole day on just budget. So we're going to stop there. But check your math. Find out if you have matching funds. Get those kind of lined up. And go from there. All right, next. So what can you include in a budget? You can include all of these things in budgets unless the grant says that's not allowed. So salaries of people, yep, pay yourself, pay your employees, pay yourself livable wages. It's disheartening to me to see nonprofits who pay their employees at wages where they themselves are eligible for benefits or for services. So you want to pay people for the skills that they have and create a good atmosphere. Fringe benefits that can be budgets are allowed to include that. That includes all the stuff the organization has to pay, such as workers' comp, unemployment, all those things that you have to pay. Plus, if you provide um, health insurance or retirement to other employees, you should include it in the grant. Be consistent with whatever you do for the rest of your employees. Just because someone's grant funded, you can't pay them less or more. They should be consistent with what's going on. Travel costs, that includes conferences, that includes conference fee, travel to and from the conference, the hotels, their per diem food while they're gone, can also include just regular mileage and day-to-day operations from the office to wherever they're going and back to the office. You can't pay people to travel from home to work, and you can't give people food if they are in their home area. It's expected that you're responsible for your own lunch, unless you're traveling outside of your area where you don't have access to your normal stuff. So that's kind of how travel works. Supplies, that includes office supplies as well as program supplies. So if you need to buy manuals, books, things that are used in the program, those are program supplies, but they still are considered supplies. Equipment is generally anything that's over $10,000 when you're talking about federal grants, and has a shelf life of more than 3 years. So even though we would call a laptop a piece of equipment, it would go in your supply line item in your budget because it's something that needs replaced frequently. So it's a consumable because it's going to wear down and go away. Equipment would be more things like an X-ray machine or a vehicle or um, a refrigerator, commercial refrigerator for a food pantry, or something big is a piece of equipment, science equipment, health equipment. You could include consultants and subawardees in your budget. A consultant is somebody who is providing a service to help the organization, and a subawardee is somebody who's providing a service to help your participants. Excuse me. Apologize. Okay, so that's one of the differences. Again, I could do a whole session on the differences between those, but just kind of keep that in mind. Consultants help the organization, subawardees help the participants. Participant costs. These are things that participants of the program get to keep or get to fully use. So if you're paying rent for someone, that's a participant cost. If you are providing work boots and tools for a job, that's a participant cost. If you are providing a scholarship or a stipend for participation, that is a participant cost. Those don't go in your supplies, they're separate. And the reason is there's certain accounting differences that your organization has to track for those. And it does impact on federal grants, the base measurement that you use to figure out your administrative costs or your indirect costs. Indirect costs are mainly for federal grants, some state grants, but the indirect costs are true costs that it costs your organization to run a grant program. So, and these are things that are often shared amongst multiple programs. So let's say you have 4 staff members in one room. Which grant is going to pay for the utilities in that room? It's too hard and too time consuming to calculate all that out. So the federal government does allow you to use an indirect cost rate to cover those type of costs. Now, there's a lot of rules and a lot of regulations on what can be considered indirect and how you can use those funds and that kind of thing. So I'm not going to go into that here, but most foundation, corporation grants, community foundation, you're not going to have to worry about indirect costs. Sometimes they'll allow you an administrative cost, but you don't have to worry about indirect. If you are in a circumstance where you're a larger organization, you apply for a lot of grants, a lot of federal grants, um, you can either get a negotiated indirect cost where you work with an accountant to help set up a rate and get it approved by the government, or there is what's called a de minimis rate, which is a flat rate that can be used toward federal grants. But that's another session, so we'll just leave that there. So basically, don't shortchange yourself when you're thinking about your budget. You can include all of these items in there. We often think it's just for stuff for participants, but no, it can be stuff that you can use for your organization. All right, next. We're down to our last 15 minutes here, so I'm going to get through this quickly and then open up for any questions. All right, so your budget narrative. Some organizations, some grants ask for a narrative of your budget and not just a spreadsheet of numbers. So what that means is they want you to explain how you decided on the numbers that you have. So you're going to show your work with words and numbers. So for instance, I'm going to purchase in my supply line item, I have $1,200. I'm going to purchase a a curriculum piece for 12 participants, and it costs $100 a piece. So that is 100 times 12 equals 1,200, and that's all used for training materials. Or I'm going to travel an average of 15 miles a day, 3 days a week at 65 cents a mile. And that's how I came up with this number that is in my travel line item. Or we're going to go to a conference. It's going to cost $400 for registration. We're going to send 3 people. We'll need 3 hotel rooms, and it's drivable. So we're going to use one vehicle with mileage reimbursement or company gas card, and you put in a number for your gas. That kind of thing. That's how you explain it. They just want to know how you came up with those numbers. Don't overthink it. Just write it out like you really did come up with it, and that'll be the clearest to the reviewers. Okay, next. So one thing that a common mistake I see is people don't think about what happens after the grant, right? There's no guarantee that this money will continue. The grant, once you get a grant, they're under no obligation to keep giving you grants, right? This is part of your planning process. You want to know what it's going to cost to sustain this program if the grant is when the grant ends. Now, there's a few things to look at when you talk about a sustainability plan. One, is future funding needed? Okay, so one thing that you may do if you're doing construction and you need to build a new recovery home, then you have this one-time infusion of funds to build the building. You're not going to need to build this building again, right? So the money that it costs for construction and architects and permits and utility setup, all that's already done. You're not going to need that again. So this is a one-time expense, and that goes into your plan. If, but then with that program, you're also going to have ongoing costs, such as paying the utilities that are in there, paying for maintenance and upkeep. Maybe there's grass that needs mowed and landscaping that needs taken care of. Maybe you have to shovel the driveway during certain times, or maybe you have to pay for community parking somewhere. Those kind of things. You got to think about where that money's going to come from. And the situation of a recovery home, some of that may come from the rents that the participants pay. Some of that may come from the shop that you have created where you're going to sell wood items that are made by program participants. Or maybe you're going to have an annual event that helps pay for some of those costs, right? A fundraising event. Where are you going to get that money from? Think about it. You need to figure out how much things are going to cost to keep it going the way at the level you want it to go, and what happens next. Now, realistically, some of that is we're going to continue to write grants. We're going to continue to seek partnerships and donors. Those are all legitimate reasons to have, that's part of your sustainability plan. So don't forget to include that. But also be creative with what other monies you're going to have coming in that you might be able to use as well. But plan for that. Okay, next. All right, so where will this show up? these items show up in budget narrative, and sustainability plan. That's usually what they're called. Sometimes they'll say ongoing costs instead of sustainability plan, but that's about it. Okay, next. All right, the other thing that grants often ask for is either an executive summary or an abstract. Now, best practices are this will be the last thing that you write because you figured out all the information while you were writing the proposal. However, it's the first thing the reviewers are going to read. So just remember that less is more when you're writing your abstract. You want to just be very clear and to the point. And it has to be a new abstract for every proposal you write. You can't just reuse the same one over and over again because each proposal is going to be slightly different. You're still going to answer all those questions: who, what, when, where, why, how, and how much, but you're just going to do it really, really short. Give yourself enough time to write this. Don't wait till the last minute and throw something together because you're out of time, or don't skip it. If you skip it, you're going to lose enough points that you probably won't get funded. If you rush through it, the reviewers are not going to know what to look for when they're reading the review, and it can really hurt you. So give yourself enough time to do that. This is one place where AI is very helpful. If you can drop in your proposal and say, write me a one-page abstract answering these 3 or 4 questions, whatever the guidelines ask for, it can draft it for you, but then you need to fix it because it's not going to do it exactly right because it doesn't know the passion. It's going to feel cold. It's going to feel vague. When AI writes stuff, it's really quite it's kind of just mid, as the kids would say, right? It's not, it doesn't pull at the heartstrings. It doesn't get engage the reader. So use that for a template to get started and then fix it and put your personality into it and put your passion of what you're doing into it. Okay, next. Common attachments that you need for grants are things that you can gather and have on hand and use over and over again. Job descriptions of your key personnel, and then job descriptions for new positions that you plan to hire through a grant. You'll need to have an organizational budget. If you are a new organization and you haven't figured out what your organizational budget needs are, you're not ready to write a grant. This is something that they're all going to ask for. You have to have that in plans and set up. Any kind of annual reports you might have or any data that you've collected, just keep that ready. Sometimes they'll ask for that. If you haven't been in operation long enough, then just, you can give a month or two report out of what you've been doing, and just explain that we're a new organization and this is what's happening. But annual reports, if you provide those, are helpful. Letters of commitments or MOUs or letters of support. This is one thing else to take with you is that a letter of commitment is one that says, my partner commits to do this. They agree to do some action or provide some service. A letter of support is, we really like this organization. You should give them some money. And there is a difference. So look and see which way the funder is asking for it. Do they want to see commitments? And an MOU is when there's multiple partners. It makes it easier to do than just multiple letters. But are they looking for a commitment? Or are they looking for a character reference in a support letter? Okay, next. I think we're coming to the end. Yep, you can sign up for information on our email list at our website. And now we'll open it up for any questions in the last couple of minutes here. Well, thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that. It's a nice comment in the chats. Thank you. Anybody have any questions? You can reach out to me after this through my website is on there, and I can answer questions as they come up. My email is just Nicki@thegrandadvantage.net. So we'll go from there. Thank you guys. I appreciate the comments. How much wiggle room should we build into our budget? Okay, that is a good question. I usually, when it comes to staffing, I try and be as accurate as I can, but give myself enough room that I can hire somebody who's going to negotiate with me a little bit, right? So if you know the bottom line, your starting salary is here, I go up a little bit, maybe come to a round number for that first year to give me room to hire. But then also knowing that I'm probably putting in a year's worth of budget for that person, and it may take me 6 weeks to get them hired. So there's a little bit of wiggle room in your budget there too. When it comes to supplies, I base it on what I've spent in the past, and try and be as accurate as possible. Equipment, I usually give myself a little bit of a pad because prices go up and down so much. If I need to, like if a grant says you can have $10,000 and my budget's at $9,058, I put the extra in supplies because I know I'm going to find a way to spend it. I'll buy more ink cartridges and that'll be gone. So that's kind of how I do that. Great. Great. I like that. I'm hoping to help my coworker and take some things off her plate grant wise. Wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. All right. Dana, did you see any other questions I missed?
I think that's it, Nikki. Thank you so
Okay.
much. You did such a
Thank
fabulous
you.
job, and I think everyone knows why you've received over or helped people receive over $50 million in grants now, because you're truly an expert, and we can tell how much you care and do what you love. So it's always
Well,
nice to
thank
witness
you.
that.
I appreciate that. Yep, but just reach out and I'll be back next month and we'll talk about mistakes, the top mistakes we make after we get the grant, that can jeopardize your future funding. So tune in for that one and we'll see you then.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next month. Bye, Nikki.
Bye.